on all fronts, diplomatic, political and military, but now India is much better prepared to deal with China. I'll take a short break. I'll come back to you, Commodore Bhaskar, on that one. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We look back at the events of 1962 and whether or not India is better prepared to deal with the threat from China. We continue the discussion with Commodore Uday Bhaskar. Commodore Bhaskar, as one commentator has called it, in the run-up to the 50th anniversary, what we are witnessing is a lot of anguished commentary in our newspapers, etc. Do you think India and China are ready to bury the ghost of 1962? Can we come out of the shadow of the 1962 war?
I think we should come out of the trauma of that war. And I'd just like to add one more line, if I may, Amandra, and this is apropos what Ms. Chaudhary said. I would like to differ, most respectfully, but quite unambiguously. Because if you recall, and this is part of the reason I think as to how India and China can perhaps move away from the past and look at a more positive future. My reason for saying that actually 1962 was a big deal and that we cannot just forget it and get on with it, as was suggested, for two reasons. One is, as I said earlier, the Indian state was in amnesia. It was refusing to accept the reality of this war. And in the run-up to the 50th anniversary, I've been studying this war reasonably almost every year for the last 10 years to see how India and China differently approach this war.
Okay.
And there are a very interesting set of observations which are very contrasting. China is not spending much time on this war.
Right.
As far as they are concerned,
going to bring that up.
They actually remember the war with Japan far more intensely than we do. In December 2012, we'll have the 75th anniversary of the rape of Nanking. And I'm sure that we will see the same kind of anguish and outpouring because every country and every society has its own set of traumas that it differently recalls. My reason as an analyst for drawing attention to October 62 and differing with what Ms. Chaudhary said, that if you look at the enormity of what the Indian political leadership had done at that time. After all, war is an extension of politics. We all accept that. Prime Minister Nehru, assisted, or shall we say, in a way, enabled by Mr. Krishna Menon, the defense minister at that time, had completely abdicated from what was their primary responsibility, which was the defense of India. Now, the commentary is not so much anguished. I think what we are seeing...
Nuclear power. Why don't we give a clear indication to China that if they don't stop the helicopter incursions into Arunachal Pradesh, we will shoot down some of the helicopters. And the second thing is, how do we break this axis of evil? I mean, Pyongyang, Beijing, Islamabad. How do we break this axis of evil in the 21st century? Thank you, ma'am. Jai Hind.
All right, Amartya, we'll have to wait for your answer until we return from this quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Caller from Mysore, Karnataka, Pradeep Malviya. Welcome to the program. What's your question?
Good evening, ma'am. This is Pradeep Malviya. My question is, ma'am, that now that two of our neighbors, China and Pakistan, both are having nuclear bombs. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
And, ma'am, there is a talk in the media for some time that the prospect of two-front wars looming ahead. So, don't you think that we should bring a strategic partner like America or some other countries so that there be equal side, both sides?
All right.
This is my question only. There
right.
is a need of bringing some strategic partner like America or some other military power so that we have equal balance between China and India.
All right, we got your question. Dr. Kondapalli, would you like to address the question as well as the question that the previous caller asked?
Yes, I think the nuclear issue has been one of the common themes of the two questions.
Right.
Really appreciate those questions. But the nuclear issue is a very sensitive issue. Nuclear weapons are weapons, political weapons. These are not weapons that you use for every occasion. Secondly, the no first use doctrine.
Hello and welcome to Public Forum. I'm Amandra Bhatt. It's the 50th anniversary of the war between India and China, a war that led to a humiliating defeat for India. It was a tragic episode in India's history, a story of failure on all fronts, political, diplomatic and military. Can we say the episode is well behind us and we have moved on? China is our second largest trading partner, and throughout these 50 years, our borders have remained peaceful. Can this peace be made permanent? Today in Public Forum, as we recall the events of 1962, we discuss the problems that confront us in our dealings with China and what the future holds. And to discuss the same, we have with us in our studios three distinguished guests. Please welcome Commodore Uday Bhaskar, noted strategic affairs analyst, currently fellow with Society for Policy Studies. Welcome to Public Forum, Commodore Bhaskar. Sitting next to him is Neela Roy Chaudhary, senior journalist, currently head of Symbiosis IRGA Mag. Welcome to Public Forum, Ms. Chaudhary. And we are also joined by Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli of the Center of East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to Public Forum, Dr. Kondapalli. Commodore Bhaskar, I'd like to begin with you. We know that the India-China war is an episode in our history that has left bitter memories. It's not something that we pat ourselves on the back on. But don't you think that it's something that has still left deep scars on our psyche?
Well, there's no doubt when we recall October 1962.
Bhaskar said a formal tribute was paid to those who lost their lives at Amar Jawan Jyoti. But there's also a feeling that this sacrifice could have been avoided altogether, could have been prevented.
Hindsight is always a fantastic thing. So to say that it could have been prevented or otherwise is something that is territory that I will not venture into. Having said that, it is definitely a very welcome and a pleasant fact that the government of India has finally accepted ownership and decided to commemorate the people who actually laid down their lives for this particular unfortunate episode.
Realize that there's no point brooding over it, and there's no point going about breastbeating over it, and we are ready to move on.
Brooding about it is not going to help. A very large part of the population of this country was born after this particular event. Why do you want to perennially? But that doesn't mean that you constantly beat yourself on the head.
Do you look back at the events of 1962, and do you think it's something that continues to scar us?
Well, I think there has been a collapse of the political leadership's role, military leadership's role. The diplomatic aspects as well were not really up to the mark. There is also the intelligence failure. The intelligence chief was briefing Prime Minister Nehru about the amassing of the troops by the Chinese from 1959 onwards. And soon after the military operation,
we will have consequences that could be disastrous for this country. 59. Now I gather, and this has all been there in the public domain, but again, not adequately burnished, that Mr. Krishna Menon, as the defense minister, perhaps did not project it in the right manner to the Prime Minister. So there was complacency. So my reason for this recall is to say that unless you remember your past objectively, you cannot go through the process of catharsis in a positive way. I see Mr. Antony's gesture today as a very important and a very courageous decision.
Right.
It's a brave defense minister who is able to put back what happened over 50 years and say that now we should acknowledge that war. And I hope this is the beginning, and that I have been suggesting that this should be the beginning of bringing the Henderson-Brooks report, which, if you remember, was commissioned after the war to look at the military aspect of the failure.
Right.
I hope it's brought into Parliament and the country can have a debate.
Right.
So if India and China are to move ahead and learn from the past, the first step is to accept and confront that there was a past which was not very pleasant. And in that, why do I keep repeating that it was a humiliation and trauma for India that the younger generation, which is born well after the war, and I presume, Amandra, you're part of that, Prime Minister Nehru, in a very famous radio speech, actually said bye-bye to Assam and Nifa. When I remember going to that part and talking to people, they were shattered. The Indian state, forget about the alienation of the Northeast now, they always recall that in 1962, Delhi was prepared to, in a way, write off the East. So these were huge issues. Now, no breast beating. We are saying objectively recall the past, but we also have to accept our national traits. That this is a country that is obsessed with cricket, with cinema, with crime, And now we have the fourth C, corruption, of different orders. Now we have to look at national security objectively.
Okay.
Our parliament has to look at it objectively. And this particular event is important for that reason, both for the Indian state and civil society, as I say, to objectively recall the past. That war did not in any way, I would say, for the Indian military, there was no dearth of gallantry. There was no dearth of professionalism. Indian soldiers were fighting at heights of 14,000 feet in summer clothing, in a canvas shoe that has got a brick color. It's a shame on this country's political leadership that they sent people in that manner. People died. So all we are saying is, what lessons have we learned? I mean, names like Major Shaitan Singh, the battle at
Commodore Bhaskar said we are ready to look back at the events objectively now with the sacrifices of our Jawans being honored. But why is it that in China there's very little commentary on the 1962 war, whereas in India it continues to play on our psyche, we continue to be scarred and wounded by it. There is a lot of commentary over this issue.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to just sort of say that I accept what Commodore Bhaskar had said in terms of the need to objectively look at it. All I was suggesting was that it is not that traumatic an episode in the sense that a country can lose out and then gain subsequently. I mean, it was somebody of the stature of Jawaharlal Nehru is something that is somewhat unparalleled in today's scenario in the political setup. So at that point of time, this was a man who could do no wrong. That he subsequently actually did so many wrongs is something that we are all finally beginning to come to terms with now. And given the state of the polity today, I don't necessarily think that that is a sort of something that gives you a lot of succor, frankly, if given the sort of inactivity or the inaction or the lack of political will, shall we say. I think where we have really come ahead is the fact that there is a level of thinking, strategic thinking, call it what you will, which allows you a sense of looking ahead and seeing what is best for the country, and it is not just in the hands of one or two people ultimately. There will be a far larger pool of inputs in the event of any such strategic decisions being taken. It will not be a Krishna Menon who reports whatever he wants to or doesn't do.
2012 is not the India of 1960.
Certainly not. But there are some aspects of our national character which unfortunately we haven't managed to shed. But be that as it may, at this point of time, what happened in 1960?
Then recently, there are also other accounts such as by Wang Hongwei, Chao Wei-wen, and a host of other younger scholars who have written on 1962.
Okay.
What the problem with these accounts is that they follow the official discourse. The official discourse has two components. One is that Nehru was wrong in terms of the forward policy of establishing over 100 outposts in Ladakh as well as in Nifa areas.
All right.
Number two, Nehru was wrong in giving refuge to the Dalai Lama in 1959, which created circumstances that were intervening in internal affairs of China.
All right.
So the key argument of all these texts is to blame India for this. This argument is specious as well as dangerous because the same kind of situation exists today.
Right.
You have over
exactly.
1,20,000 Tibetans in India. There is always the constant Trans-Himalayan.
Right. That's a very important point you raise, that even 50 years later, after 14 rounds of talks, the border issue still remains unresolved and Tibet continues to be a sore point between India and China. When we come back from this short break, we discuss the present state of relations between India and China. Stay with us. Subject we are discussing in public forum this evening. You can call us on our toll-free numbers that are 1800115313 and 1800115314. Continuing with you, Commodore Bhaskar, we've been discussing how this was a war that left a damaging impact on our psyche and how it has changed the way we conduct our foreign policy with China. It has left an impact on our strategic outlook altogether. But we can say that relations between China and India do stand on a more surer footing. Is it correct to say that?
I think that would be a fair assessment to say that they are more stable now than they have been in the past, and we hope that they would improve in the years ahead, with a couple of caveats. And here I think we must give due credit to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, because in 1988 there could be all kinds of drivers, and I think Professor Kondapalli drew attention to one of them, which is India's, shall we say, comprehensive national power at that time. India under intent, Chinese intent.
Right, absolutely. Well, we have a caller in the program right now with us, Manish from Karnataka. Welcome to the program, Manish. What's your question?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Manish, could you lower down the volume of your television, please?
Yeah, hello ma'am. Hello. Ma'am, this is Manish from Belgaum, Karnataka. Yeah. Yes, I will. This is Manish from Belgaum.
Yes, Manish.
My question is that we have, as our chief guest was telling, that we have the good relations from with China. But thing is that why still in the problems are coming in the northeast states, and gun weapons which have been provided in these states, like the Me-16, that revolver and other that has been provided.
Well, it seems we've lost the line. I'll come to you, Ms. Chaudhary. How do you look at the present state of relations between India and China? Because China's military build-up and expansion, it continues to cause anxiety in India, something that we often call muscle flexing on the part of China, whereas India's forays into Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, etc., that doesn't go down well with China.
China is probably the Indian polity's largest challenge in terms of how to deal with it.
A India-US alliance against China.
All right. Well, we have a caller from Delhi now, Santosh Kumar. Welcome to the program. What's your question?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Santosh Kumar. I'm IFS aspirant. So I want to ask 3 questions to Mr. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, sir.
Go on.
One is about what is the present Tibet issue in the India-China border relations, and my second question is how the rise of nationalism in Japan and China going to affect our relations with both the countries. And my third question is, there are 3 sets of relations at present, like China-US, China-Russia and China-Pakistan. How these set of relations going to cast image on our national interests, and what is the strategy to deal with it? And my fourth question is about Srikant Kondapalli sir told about strategic autonomy. We can't be 100% maintain strategic autonomy, because all the powers are impinging our national interests. So we should conduct our relations.
Okay, Santosh, we got your point. Commodore Bhaskar, starting with you very quickly because we're running out of time.
I know, Mr. Santosh, you have asked some very complex questions towards the very end of the program, but very quickly, if I may respond to all of them. Your first reference is to Tibet.
Right.
Now, Tibet is going to be a very, very central issue, definitely from the Chinese perspective, because in shorthand, if I could say, Beijing has been constantly concerned about India's possible use of the Tibet card. And I think the Dalai Lama's presence in India and everything that he represents is cause for concern. You see in the spate of self-immolations, in Tibet. Now, these.
How do you see India-China relations? What in the future? How do you see them evolving?
With cautious optimism, because I think India and China have enormous opportunities, particularly on a large range of development issues, global issues, and there also is a lot of space for their economic cooperation. But this can only happen, as I said, if we are able to address the more prickly areas where there are sensitivities on security and strategic concerns with candor, and adopt an approach which talks about accommodating interests, legitimate security and strategic interests, and also has a respect for the sensitivities.
All right. Okay, Ms. Chaudhary, very quickly.
Well, I think that we need to get our act together as a country in terms of developing our fundamentals and expect that we can be treated as equals only then. At this point, I still think that the relationship is not a terribly equal one, and I think part of that is from our own psyche and sensitivity from 62, and I think that is what needs to be overcome. We need to get our own house in order first before we can take them on full time. But after that, I think
All right.
we're
Okay, Dr. Kondapalli, in just one sentence.
I think the Indian response after the 1962 war is not to have much of romantic ideas vis-a-vis China, but a measured and a cautious response.
All right. Well, on that note, it's time for me to wrap up this discussion here. I'd like to thank all my guests, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Neelova Roy Chaudhary and Dr. Kondapalli for coming to our studios. It was a pleasure having you here. That's it for now in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.